Hello and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and today's guest has been on the show so many times, even from the very beginning, and for good reason. It is Laura Vanderkam. She spent over a decade studying how people actually spend their time, and her new book, Big Time, A Simple Path to Time Abundance, might be her most important argument yet, that time isn't the scarce resource you think it is, and the story you tell yourself about having none of it is the thing actually costing you. We get into why you're probably not more overworked than you think, why complexity isn't the enemy, chaos is, and what it looks like to read War and Peace one chapter a day. So if you think that you don't have enough time for anything, I dare you to challenge that thought and listen in as you enjoy this conversation with Laura Vanderkam. Well, this week, it is my privilege to welcome back to the show, Laura Vanderkam. Laura, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the last time I talked to you, I was on your show, which I'll make sure to put that in the show notes, by the way, before breakfast. That was a great time. A unique show, a unique format also. So
it's been a lot of fun to do interviews for that show. I've gotten to talk with so many fascinating people and, share that with my listeners. So I'm glad you could come on.
Yeah. So, and if you ever, here I am publicly self-inviting myself again. Yeah. Let me reframe. If you ever need me to come back, I am more than willing, but I'm under no contract to do so. So there you go.
Eric, we'll find a week where I'm like, oh gosh, I don't have any guests.
There you go.
What do we do? We're going to do Eric again.
In a pinch, when you really need somebody last minute, I'm your guy. There you go.
All right. We're good. We'll have that.
Because sure. I'll make sure to make the time. And speaking of time, that's the thing you talk about. You've written 168 hours, Off the Clock, Tranquility by Tuesday. You've basically built your career on how people spend their time, and you've been talking about it on your show and this show for over a decade. So my obvious question is, your new book, Big Time, which I was a little disappointed to find out it's not all about Peter Gabriel's one of his greatest songs ever, but you talk about time again. And I'm like, what was in this book and why now? And what hadn't you already been saying?
You sound like the question my agent asked when we were writing the book proposal.
So you're saying I should be a book agent.
Why
Great.
Does the world need another Vanderkam book on time? Which is a good question, perhaps. But I mean, there was more I wanted to say. What can I say? I find this topic so fascinating because you can come at just about any topic through the lens of time, because everyone on this planet has 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week, 8,760 hours in a year. We are all playing with the same building blocks. Different people have various other resources, whether they are richer or smarter than the rest of us, but nobody has more time. And so it's just this topic that keeps giving, right? I can keep coming to this well again and again. But the difference between Big Time and some of my other books, I really explore this theme of time abundance, that what happens when you move beyond a story of time scarcity and truly do start to see time as a friend, that we do have time for what matters to us in life. How does that change how we approach our lives, how we approach our work, how we approach day-to-day living? I do think with some smart strategies, it is possible to fall in love with your schedule. So that is the goal of this book.
It's like one of those great, subtle, non-obvious sci-fi movies that kind of shifts your perspective after you're done watching it, where the whole book turns on the idea that time is abundant, not scarce. And you use this imagery of being handed a winning lottery ticket that you never even bought. So where did that reframe come from for you? What was it? Was it like the years of the time diary data or something else in your own life?
Honestly, it's because I have this bizarre obsession with the ancient Earth. And so I've been on a kick of reading books about how the earth formed and how life came to be on Earth. And as part of that, all sorts of, things that happened, or like the in-Permian extinction was the particular obsession that I was reading about at the time I was writing the introduction to this book, which is that, 252 million years ago, life was almost wiped out on planet Earth. People know about the extinction that took the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, but this was a big one before that, 252 million years ago. So, it's this idea like it could have gone so wrong, right? The idea that we're even here. Life could have been wiped out right there. As it wasn't. Like the dinosaurs came out of that extinction. After the next one, the mammals come out of that. And then here we are, 60 million years after that. And it's like all of this is so completely random that we exist and that we have time to manage. And so if you think of it from that perspective, it's like if somebody handed you a winning lottery ticket, and it's not like you've been going to 7-Eleven trying to buy tickets every day. This just came to you. And now you're like, you've got this pot of cash to manage. Now what? And yes, you could complain that it should have been bigger. Like you could complain that you have some amount of taxes you have to pay on these winnings, but I hope we would approach these winnings with a sense of hopeful possibility. And I think there's certainly an argument to view time the same way, that we have been handed this pot of hours to manage, however long it happens to be for each of us. We get to do so many things with it if we choose to. So let's approach from that angle and see what we make of it.
Now, here's something that's going to stop people, because I think you're arguing we are not, in fact, more overworked or more sleep deprived than we used to be. And I think that cuts hard against how almost everybody, including myself, describes their life right now. So I'm going to push a little bit and say, who is it that abundance story is hardest for? Where does that you have more time than you think, where does that stop being true?
I think all of us have moments in our lives where we feel incredibly busy, where we might feel rushed or frantic or behind or overwhelmed. Those are all very common human emotions when it comes to how we feel about our time. But, I've been tracking my time for 11 years. I have had thousands of other people track their time for me. I've also studied lots of bigger time diary sets, that different organizations have done. And, the idea that we are not increasingly overworked is just looking at average work week data. If you go back 100 years, you look at how much people were working in like the late 1800s through to the 1920s or so, before modern labor standards came to be, work weeks were considerably longer. If you think about, when people were in the sort of world, farm work can take a ton of time, for instance, especially when it's done without, labor-saving machinery or in old factories or things like that. I think that's just looking at how people spend their time. You look at the average work week now, it's a lot closer to about 35 hours, which is very different from what you see 100 years ago. Are there some people who work a lot of hours? Sure. Are there occasions when all of us work longer than we would like? Also, sure. But for many people, even in sort of extreme jobs, when you track your time over the long haul, you'll see that there often is some space outside of work. If you look at people with caregiving responsibilities, there's often still some space outside of caregiving responsibilities and housework. There are times that we are awake and not engaged in work of the paid or unpaid variety. And so the question is, well, even if we have a limited number of hours, what do we want to do with it? And I think even if people don't buy the idea that we have time, it is a much more useful story to be telling yourself that you have time, because when you don't think you have time, you don't ask what you want to do with it, because why would you? What would be the point? You have no time whatsoever, so why would you even bother to think about what you want to do with it? And so when a spot of time opens up, as it does for all of us, even if only in small bits, we'll do whatever is easiest, whatever is right in front of us, which these days tends to be reading headlines, checking email after you just checked it 2 minutes ago, scrolling through the WhatsApp threads and, looking at social media comments. Whereas if you assume that you do have some time, if you are telling yourself a story that I do have time, even if it's not as much as I want, I have some, then you start to ask what you'd like to do with it. And then when time does appear, you have more fulfilling options. So it's just a much better story, even if you don't really believe it.
Well, and you're really clear about this, that it's not about catching people doom scrolling. You don't care about, them watching 2 hours of Netflix. It's more about where they're seeing the hours actually go, the data itself, having something to look at versus it's gone and it's in the past and you didn't track it, so you don't know.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I'm always encouraging people to do is to put things into their leisure time that are noticeable, right? Like if you sit down and read a book for an hour in the evening, maybe after your kids go to bed, after you've done the housework or anything like that, it's hard to tell yourself that evening didn't exist. I mean, you read a book for an hour, that was something. Whereas if you're kind of scrolling around, you're still on the device that you could be using to work. Like you haven't really notice that this leisure time is happening, and it's sort of less actively feeling like it's chosen. And so then we don't remember it. And then we can persist in this story that I have no time whatsoever. So making the active choices where we see it reminds us that this time does exist.
Well, and there's this cultural pull these days that what you would do is you would do the time tracking. You would then use the data to do a deep dive into minimalism, paring back, simplifying, and you plant a flag against that. You say that complexity isn't the enemy, chaos is, and that you can keep the big, full, complicated life, but you have to run it like a circus. There's a ringleader, in other words, like you say, and somebody is going to say, I don't know that that's possible. So make the case for that, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, once I tell people like figuring out their time and all this, I mean, there's a big move toward like simplicity and minimalism, and I totally get it. And I love some of the ideas associated with it. But the truth is, I mean, some of us just have complicated lives. I have 5 kids. Like one kid would be more simple than 5 kids, but I have them now. So like, what am I going to do with them? Like, I got to manage it. People have jobs that are complicated. Somebody working like as a high school principal. You think about all the different moving parts and constituencies you have to keep happy. People who are involved in many things in their communities, have family members that they're taking care of. Like, there's just so much going on in many people's lives that simplicity is not necessarily an option. And so I would say, well, complexity is not the enemy. Chaos is the enemy. You can have a complex life and not feel it as chaotic. And you mentioned my use of the circus metaphor. And when people tell me my life is a circus, they mean it is chaotic. But that is a total slander against circuses because they are incredibly well organized. Like if the tigers are supposed to be in one ring, they are in that ring. They are not in a different ring. Like everything is happening exactly where it is supposed to be at the time it is supposed to be there. And so I think we should aspire to have our lives be like a circus. And we are the ringmasters, calmly in charge of it all. We know that there is this complexity, but we are sort of on top of it, viewing it, knowing where things are going to happen, knowing where the attention goes, making sure we're putting on a spectacular show. So there's certain practices we can do to put ourselves more in that mindset. But I think having that image in your brain is the first step toward making a complex life feel more exciting rather than you're hanging on for dear life.
Well, speaking of circuses, you talk about a pastor in the book, Kurt, and I have friends who are pastors, so that's why I'm making that metaphor. He went from burned out and depressed to recovered, and partly through weekly planning and a refrigerator magnet. How much of that is the system and how much of that is something deeper?
I think it's both. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to tell anyone that like weekly planning and a refrigerator magnet are going to cure your depression because that would be unlikely. But it is the case that sometimes life feels out of control when we are not able to handle all our responsibilities in a way that feels like we are showing up for them, right? And if people want more than you think you can give, both at work and at home, when you don't feel you can protect any time for rest and recovery, you can very quickly become burnt out and feel like it's impossible to do these things that I have set out to do. But, he took some time off from work and then was able to sort of put in new systems before he started his next job, where he was very clear about planning the different spheres of his life, professional, family, and himself, thinking through the week and what was important in each, and then setting certain boundaries and having certain systems that made sure that time that was protected for one sort of life was not being impinged on by other things. So a pastor job could happen at any point. Obviously, there are pastoral emergencies at any point, but you could have a good system in your church where, different people are on call at different times. You can also decide as a pastor that if you have a meeting in the evening that could be running from 7 to 10 p.m. Maybe that's a day you don't actually have to be at work at 8 in the morning, right? And that it's okay for you to do more personal or family stuff in the morning, knowing that your day is going to run from noon to 10 that day. And you can make choices like that. There's nobody stopping you from doing that. It's just your own decision to have life be more orderly and planned out in terms of when you are doing things.
I think that one of the things for me was one of my favorite things in the book is this idea of dream big, plan small, and you read War and Peace 10 minutes a day. You've listened to all of Bach. The mechanics almost seem too simple. So why doesn't everybody do this with the big thing they keep saying that they want to do?
Yeah, I mean, my big interests may be different from other people. I'm not sure everyone on the planet wants to read War and Peace or listen to all the works of Bach, but, they are masterpieces. So I think they might be worth making space for in your life. But we often tell ourselves a story that, a big thing like that is for when you're retired, like when the kids are out of the house. But many big things can be broken down into very small, doable steps and then spread over a long period of time. And as long as you are consistent about doing those steps, time is going to pass. I mean, time passes one way or the other, but we can spend our bits of time ephemera on lots of different random things, or we could spend our bits of ephemera on one thing. And in doing one thing, we can make a lot of progress. So for instance, with reading War and Peace, it is a very big book, but it has 361 extremely short chapters. Right? Each chapter is like 3-4 pages. You could read it in a couple of minutes. So that's what I did. I started reading on January 1st a couple of years ago, and I finished on December 27th, as one would if you read a chapter a day. And it was so doable like that way. I mean, it was taking about the same amount of time that I spend brushing my teeth. And I am sure that most people listening to this have brushed their teeth fairly consistently for the past 361 days. So if you could do that, you could probably make space to read War and Peace if you want to. If you break it down into small enough steps that you don't feel a ton of resistance to doing it, and then just keep going, you will finish.
It's funny because you mentioned War and Peace. Some friends of mine and I, for months now, have been reading, much like this, the Odyssey, or a translation of the Odyssey, the best known translation, the one in anticipation of Christopher Nolan's movie coming out this summer. And it's the version that he used to work on his movie.
Which version did he do? Is it the Robert Fagles one or is it a different one?
It's a woman. Oh, why am I blanking? It's right here somewhere, but it's out of view of me. So I can't tell you, but later. I will make a note right now. I will put the link in the show notes. I'll let you know also afterwards when we're done recording. Right. I'll grab it. It's right here.
So, too.
But it's great. And again, each chapter, 5 to 10 minutes tops. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that times matter, time's moving no matter what. And us having nothing to show for it. Well, you can see that the bookmark moved after you've done a few. It impacts you more. You see it. It's visually accountable, so to speak. So.
And here's the thing. I mean, it's fun to just like be able to say, haha, I read War and Peace or I read the Odyssey or anything like that. But it also changes the story we tell ourselves about our time. And this is all part of achieving that sense of time abundance. Because when you do big things in your time, like when you have the time to read the Odyssey, it becomes very challenging to tell yourself the story, I have no time whatsoever. I am starved for time. I have no time for anything. Well, you have time to read the Odyssey. So clearly that is not true. It only took, 10 minutes a day to read the Odyssey over a long enough period of time, but you don't have to tell your brain that. You can just change the story through showing yourself through evidence that I have done big things. And so then I can do more big things should I choose to.
Well, and it allows you to tackle these big projects, so to speak, in the midst of consistent ordinary Tuesdays, because so much of life is these ordinary work days. And you've got research about making those better without changing jobs. You build it on meaning like this, like meaning, belonging, autonomy. And I know I've experienced that the belonging one is very helpful. Go make a friend at work. I mean, you had participants that found that this was genuinely awkward. And I thought, Why is that so much harder than take a break as productivity advice?
I had a couple hundred people try out certain things to do during their workday to change the experience of how we feel about our time at work. And it was, one of them was to spend 1 more hour a week on the work you enjoy most. And one of them was to spend 15 minutes deepening a work friendship. And the other was to take 2 intentional breaks a day. But the deepening a work friendship is true. It did bring up some issues of people's social awkwardness. And, honestly, sometimes you have to be coached on well, if you've convinced a colleague to hang out with you, what do you talk about? I'm like, well, I'm not sure that should be that challenging, but I guess it is, for sometimes. So somebody had the suggestion of well, okay, get them to hang out with you on a Monday. And then you ask how their weekend was and what's one thing they did over the weekend. You're like, oh, okay, I can do that. That's practical. And then of course, if the colleague has, the social skills of a first grader, they will, and then ask you how your weekend was. And if you are following my advice, hopefully you have at least one interesting thing you did over the weekend. So you can talk about that. And then between these 2 stories, now we have something we can try to come up with commonalities or to talk about, and, baby steps. Baby steps.
Yeah. One of the things that I found is that, again, building in that consistency and that anticipation, because you've said anticipating a 10-minute coffee break makes people feel better for hours, just anticipating it. And I found that same thing to be true with, it happens to be the same group of guys, which I know I am privileged and uniquely blessed with. I will call it that I have college friends that every Thursday night, mostly, we hang out. And then for the last 6-7 months now, we've been doing trivia on the first Thursday, which we were lucky that fell on the night we already hung out. First Thursday of every month at a local brewery. And we've won a number of times, gotten a bunch of free pizzas out of it. So that's been awesome. But it's just funny how all day on a Thursday, when I know I'm going to hang out with them, and especially so on a trivia night, I am just in a much better mood and my time is better spent.
Yeah. Well, you want to make sure you're done with whatever you're doing. So you get to trivia night.
Exactly.
You're definitely not going to miss that. And it doesn't take much, 2 hours in the course of 1 week completely changes how you feel about your time. You have this thing on Thursday you are looking forward to. And so we can do this with all kinds of things, even at work. If there's a project you're really excited about, you'll look forward to that. You're doing it at 3 p.m. You're like, oh, the day is good because at 3 p.m. I have this. I'm looking forward to it. Coffee with a colleague or, something exciting you're doing on the weekend. We always want to have something that we are looking forward to because that keeps us excited about the experience of time.
Well, and to put this into something practical people can apply, you talk about weekday evenings being our weekday evenings being our golden hours. And you've got this woman, Rebecca, who starts getting home 15 minutes earlier. She's got the same traffic. She's got the same workload. None of that's changed, but her whole evening transforms from being 15 minutes earlier. And if 15 minutes can do that, how much more of I have no time at night is really just a perception problem.
I think it is totally a perception problem. Rebecca had written me about this bizarre mindset shift she had that she switches jobs and, she's still in the same traffic. So she had been getting home sort of 6:30, stressed about it. Now she was getting home at 6:15, feeling more relaxed. Part of it was that, her new job, the team was made a point of wrapping up by 5 o'clock. So everyone's out in the parking lot at 5:15 and her hour-long commute gets her home relatively relaxed, whereas in the earlier job, she was working right up until 5:30 and then kind of raced out at that. And some people were still there, so she felt a little bad about it. It was into hour home. Getting home 15 minutes earlier is not changing anything. We were trying to figure it out. Okay, if you're home at 6:30, is it because you feel like it rounds to 7? And so now the evening is gone, whereas 6:15 rounds to 6, and so the evening is not gone. It's so ridiculous, right? It was totally 100% a mindset shift that she was starting to see the evenings as a time that was available to her, as opposed to being just the afterthought where she was stressed and spent and was just the leftovers, too little to do anything with. And now she was feeling like, oh, I have a whole evening. And so she was thinking about what she wanted to do with it. And she was, spending time sitting outside, watching her dogs, relaxed. And I think that's, an option that is available to a lot of us. Even if you are stressed at work, even if you are getting home later than you would like, you can appreciate whatever time is there because it often is a fair amount. Most people are done with work and work-related responsibilities by 6 p.m. Many people don't go to bed until sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. So we're talking 4 to 5 hours in the evening. And yes, there are things you have to do. Obviously, some people have long commutes. We have kids or other relatives we need to take care of, housework that needs to be done. But in general, those things are not consuming the entire 4 to 5 hours of the evening. There is some space. And so I'm challenging people to just put in 30 minutes of something that you would like. Choose ahead of time what it is you'd like to do. Think about where it can happen. Make it happen. Enjoy it while it's happening. Reflect on it afterwards. And this time after work will start to feel more golden. These are your golden hours as opposed to this, forgettable time that's just the scraps after everything else is dealt with.
Now you say, kind of to piggyback off of this, you say to take one night for you. And funny enough, I'm describing what I already described for me was attach it to other people. Like you say, a standing quartet rehearsal. So you can't bail, So I've got my trivia night or my other Thursdays that are like that. And yeah, I just think, and my wife, for example, she's got Tuesday nights. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, we flip. And now here's the thing, totally understand. For some people, this is not going to be as easy. Our kids are mostly grown or very much up in the ages. So they have a lot of autonomy. They don't need a lot of hands-on constant supervision, although debatable with some of them. But anyway, so point being, I just think it's funny that we almost feel like we need to attach an obligation or accountability or something to fun to make it actually happen when we're adults.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of taking one night for you. And the swap you describe is actually the perfect idea for anyone who is in a 2-parent family with kids. You would people could feel resentful if one party is getting to go to a night out with friends every Thursday and trivia and the other doesn't get anything like that. That's when you have the resentment. But if both of you get a night off that you can count on, like, you cover Tuesdays, she covers Thursdays, you both get to do what you want. You're not having to ask for it. You're not negotiating every week. You're not apologizing for leaving on Thursday. It's just the expectation. Now, obviously not all families work like that, but you could do that swap with any other adult in your life, right? You and a neighbor could trade off. One of you gets Tuesday nights, one of you gets Thursday nights, or a relative or anything like that. But protecting some time that is going to be fun for something that is for you, that is not work, is not caring for family members, is not housework. It can change the entire experience of time. And by making a commitment, it happens. Whereas if you're like, yeah, I want more me time, I'm going to read more. Well, that can fit around anything. And so it's going to be harder to sort of claim the time for it.
Now, you say something that I think could be perceived as a little heretical for the productivity world. Everyone else says, learn to say no. And no is a complete sentence. I've heard so many people say, you've got a whole chapter telling people to say yes more. And honestly, that sits in real tension, I think possibly with your own advice to set rules and plan tightly. So how do you hold those two things together? Where's the line between staying open and just overcommitting?
I think we want to say yes to the right things. And the problem, though, is most stuff is less clear. Like, it's not people like, would you like $1 million? Well, yes, I would. But many times, opportunities, new adventures, new relationships come out of saying yes to something that we're not sure how it's going to work out. Because if we knew, we'd already be doing it, right? Like, you would have already made this happen in your life if you knew how it was going to turn out. And so you have to be open to these serendipitous new things that could lead to something exciting, which means that you do need to occasionally say yes. Because boundaries and saying no, these are walls. And walls are good because walls keep out bad things. But walls also keep out good things that don't have an explicit invitation. And a lot of the awesome stuff that we want to do in life is not going to come to you with an explicit invitation. It's going to happen because you have a conversation with somebody, and then he decides to introduce you to someone else, and you have a conversation with that person. But you never would have even agreed to the first conversation if you had been like, yeah, I got to say no more often. I got to say no to everything. I'm too busy. I have to block this all off. So how do we get to this? Well, you do want to get rid of things that you don't want to do. As much as possible, we need to clear our lives of the things that feel like schedule clutter. And that's not saying no to new things. That's saying no to stuff you're already doing. right? And that's harder. But I think it is worth it over the next, 6 to 12 months or so. You could probably get rid of a lot because it's that feeling of spaciousness, that feeling of like, I could take on new things, that I don't have a packed schedule, is when you say yes to that conversation that leads to the second conversation that leads to actually something happening. And then just in terms of evaluating what you want to say yes to and say no to, in general, I want people to say no more often to the things that you are trying to talk yourself into. So you are not immediately excited, but then you start rationalizing it. Like, oh, well, I've worked with Joe for a while. It would look good on my resume. This would be the next step if I ever wanted to do X someday. And that's when you probably want to say no, because you're not excited, right? You're just rationalizing at this point. This is like a 5 or a 6 on a 10-point scale. So, maybe that's something to pass on. Where you want to think about saying yes is when you're trying to talk yourself out of it. So that means you are excited. Like you're intrigued. You're like, ooh, that could be something, but I'm so busy. I'd have to call in a favor from a colleague. I'd have to call in a favor from my spouse. Like, it's hard to travel when the kids are little. There's all these things. Like we're talking ourselves out of it. Though that's probably when you want to say yes, because all those things you're talking yourself out of it's logistics. You can figure out logistics.
Well, it means that you're not really fully committed, and that's okay. I mean, again, there's certainty is something that we think we have to have more often than we actually have it. But experimenting and being open is completely different. And again, that's where the sometimes messy, but sometimes serendipity, awesome discoveredness happens.
Yeah.
So in the book, you talk about 8,760 hours a year. And you somewhat take on Oliver Burkeman pretty directly from his book and in his 4,000 weeks, and saying basically, you only get about 4,000 weeks is what he says, so make them count. Yours is kind of the opposite, where you say like a lot of not last days. So is this a genuine disagreement with him, or are the two of you just answering different questions? Him about meaning and you about like the texture of daily life?
I think we're all getting at the same thing. I mean, that time is the building block of our lives. And obviously you don't get an infinite amount. So you want to make what you have count. But we can plan for the future. We should assume that tomorrow is not our last day. Because if you assume that life could end tomorrow, you're not going to do things that build toward long-term things, which is what you do want to do. And I know Oliver is very big into building for the future as well. I think we can make reasonable plans for much of the next year. And we can assume that we will probably make it through the next year. Like, yeah, you might not, but the odds are pretty good. Like, it's pretty good. Like, I'm probably going to be here in a year. Now, I could get struck by lightning walking outside the door, but the odds are good that I won't. And so because of that, I can start to look forward in a year and ask, what do I want my next 8,760 hours to look like? And the thing is, even with time being sort of overall scarce in the sense that it's limited, in the way we experience daily life, it is just vast, right? Like even things that we think of as big in the doing are small in the overall context of each year having 8,760 hours. I mean, I see people talk themselves into all sorts of knots about doing something like taking a 2-hour pottery class on Tuesday nights or something. And, even if let's say it runs for 15 weeks, let's say you do it twice a year, spring and fall. Let's say it takes, an hour around it to, get there and get back. So we were talking 45 hours in the spring, 45 hours in the fall. That's 90 hours. Well, there are 8,760 hours in a year. Like, so even this thing that feels so big, like, 3 hours on a Tuesday, we're talking like 1% of your entire year. We're talking, maybe 2% of your waking, non-working hours. Like, it's still a very, very small chunk of time when you look at the overall big picture, when we zoom out and look at big time. So I think, we want to view time from that perspective. Yes, time is limited, but time in the experiencing it is quite vast. And when we have that zoomed out perspective, I think we can start to make choices that allow us to put more things in our lives and not fall prey to this idea that, I'll never get to, the things that I want to get to.
Well, speaking of the experiencing of time, the last chapter on patience is, I think, the most personal in the book. You write about a brutal year of chronic back and nerve pain, and you land on this line: the key change was time. And that's a hard thing for a productivity author to admit, that sometimes the answer isn't a system, it's waiting. Was that hard to write?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to wait. I'm sure you don't like to wait either. And I don't like to know that, I could do all the right things, right? I'm eating my vegetables and yet I'm still going to be in pain in another 2 weeks. Like, it just, you don't like this, that there's nothing you can do about it but wait. But that was, in fact, the reality. Like, I just had to sort of slowly put myself back together. And the good news is that, I did get better, and I was hopeful that I would, and I did. And that's what I'm, encouraging people to think. Obviously, there's something for all of us that we won't get better for. I mean, we do only have 4,000 weeks, as Oliver puts it. So there is something that we won't recover from, but a great many things you can, right? And a great many things with time can become better. And so I like this idea of active patience. Like, you do what you can. So obviously you want to do all the exercises, all the stretching, all the, healthy living, getting your sleep, doing what your doctor tells you to. And then you also let time do its job. And time working with you will lead to things that you can't do on your own. I mean, I was powerless to, stop my chronic pain within, a week or two. But over the course of 6 months, time and me working together got to a much better place. Over the course of 12 months, I was pretty much back to, feeling better than I had before. So, patience is hard. It is certainly not my favorite virtue. There are other virtues I like much better, but if we have to go with patience, I guess we will.
Yeah. I love that you frame it as active, that it's you and time actively working as a team. For somebody who is in a hard middle that's listening right now of something, not looking back on it yet, how would you say they can actually practice that without tipping into like denial?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to do denial. I think you can, have the idea of, I am holding the ultimate outcome in my mind, that I have faith that the ultimate outcome will be positive. If you're trying to meet somebody special, like, you could see yourself dancing at your wedding, you're trying to find a job, you see yourself solving interesting problems with clever colleagues and getting paid well for your efforts. You can see this ultimate outcome. And then you can also decide that you're going to hold the timeline lightly, that you're not going to expect that it's going to happen in a week, probably not in a month, but you can decide, a long enough period of time, you could probably have a pretty good sense that it will happen. And then, you do what you can, send out your resumes, you do your informational interviews, and decide the amount of time you're putting into it, and then sort of relax the rest of the time. Like, I'm going to spend 4 hours a day on this, and then I'm going to, go to the gym. I'm going to volunteer places. I'm going to have fun, going to see friends, knowing that time is putting in its effort as well. And the two of you together are going to lead to something that's going to be awesome together. You can even try writing this story and reframing any setbacks you are experiencing as like plot twists. Right? Nobody wants to watch a movie where the hero just has awesome things happen to him the entire time. Like, that's pretty boring. Like, he has to face obstacles in the course of this. And each of the obstacles, it's some sort of outcome from that leads to the next thing that ultimately gets him to the triumph. So, you're trying to meet someone special and you have this terrible blind date. You're like trying to extricate yourself from the restaurant. You could like sort of write that story. Like, I was sitting there in the, restaurant trying to get out of there. But then that's when I was home afterwards thinking about it. That's when I reached out to 10 of my friends and just asked them to set me up with people. And I had 3 great dates come out of that, right? Like, that's the kind of thing you could write as a story. And I'm not saying it's going to come true exactly that way, but that is sort of how a movie plot works. And so you can write that story for yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Makes me think of Donald Miller and all of the storytelling stuff that he talked about when, basically drawing life lessons from script writing, so to speak. So, and it ties into the perception thing as well. When you are kind of actively interacting with the timeline in a way. So I want to come back to something that runs underneath the entire show. The premise here has always been that productivity is supposed to give you a life, not the other way around. And your book genuinely means that the payoff is swimming with sharks or singing Bach or watching the sunset from the porch. Not necessarily more output, but my real worry is you can fit more in can slide into an optimization culture awful fast. So how do you keep abundance from quietly turning into just doing more?
Well, I think you just constantly have to be asking yourself, is this what I want to be doing? Right. And as you said, there's no point to do stuff just to do stuff. It's that, does it bring me joy? And I would argue that in many cases, we can fit in more joy than we are currently doing. You know, if we look at the screen time function on most of our devices, we might see that there's some space, at least, for sitting on the porch watching the sunset, should we choose to do so. One of the reasons I decided I could start singing in a choir years ago is that I looked at how I was spending my evenings, and I'm like, I got pretty much like 5 weekday evenings a week of pretty much the same stuff, right? I could extricate myself from this one night a week and do something else, and nothing big would change. I just feel a lot more purposeful in how I was spending my leisure time. So yeah, I think if you keep your eye on mostly putting in things that are meaningful and enjoyable for yourself and the people you care about, and not putting anything in that you don't, you will avoid that optimization journey. It's an experiment. Like, you can try stuff and then decide you don't like it. And then you try something else and decide you don't like that, but that leads to a third thing that you like much better. If you view it that way, as lots of little projects, and you're not going to achieve this platonic ideal of productivity, you're just trying to live a life that you want to live.
Let's bring it all the way down to earth here. So somebody's listening to this on a Tuesday night that's already too full to them. What's the single smallest thing they could do tonight to get a taste of what you mean by big time?
Well, if we're already in the evening, I think actively making a little bit of time, even if it's only 10, 15 minutes, for something that you would enjoy and that you have chosen, will go a long way to making that day. What's that?
Intentionally.
Yeah, choose an intention for the evening instead of like, I'm so busy. It's like, I'm so busy and I'm going to read this book for 15 minutes before I go to bed. I'm so busy and I am going to call a friend for 15 minutes before I go to bed. I think that will start to change how you feel about time in general. And then maybe some other night this week, you could find 30 minutes to do something that is enjoyable for you. And once you're regularly finding 30 minutes, that changes how we feel about time. As we've mentioned earlier in the show, like, it doesn't take a big thing to completely change how you feel about, you go have the 10-minute coffee break in the afternoon with somebody you enjoy chatting with, the entire day feels different. And it's the same if you're reading that great book for 30 minutes before bed or doing a puzzle for 20 minutes in the evening. The day feels entirely different and more like it's this rich tapestry of cool stuff, as opposed to all things that were just shoved upon you.
Well, Laura, the book is called Big Time, A Simple Path to Time Abundance. And I would like to know, where should people go to find the book and the rest of your work?
Well, you can buy Big Time wherever books are sold. But if you want to learn more about it and my other work, you can come to lauravanderkam.com. It's my website. And you can read my blog posts there, find out about my newsletters, my podcasts, all that good stuff.
Time well spent.
I don't want to waste anyone's time.
Yes. Laura, again, as usual, I mean, you've been here since the beginning. It's been over, 13 years now. Every 1 to 2 years, you're back. I am glad to have you back again and looking forward to having you back again in the future. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your podcast listening to-do list. I keep coming back to that image Laura used, being handed a winning lottery ticket that you never bought. It's a strange way to think about a Tuesday, but it sticks with you. So does the chronic pain chapter, a productivity author admitting flat out that sometimes the answer isn't a better system, it's just time. And that's not a small thing to put in a book like this. If you found something useful from this episode that you need to share, don't hesitate. Do it right now. Especially if you know someone who ends most days feeling like the whole evening just vanished, no idea where it went, nothing to show for it. Send them this episode. It might be exactly the reframe they need. So hit that share button in your podcast player app of choice or go to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com. Thanks again for sharing. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next episode.